The Bible says that money is the root of all evil because it's most likely to separate you from God. When it comes to manifestation, there's two currencies that you need to operate with. There's the physical currency of money, and there's the spiritual currency of... I'm not just trying to bridge the gap between New Age philosophy and biblical teaching. I'm trying to be the bridge to bring people from the manifestation community into a better, more holistic spiritual understanding of themselves and the world around them.
On the first episode of your podcast, we took a bird's eye view look into manifestation, right? Into practical manifestation. How can I use this practice to change my life and get what I want? What are we going to do today?
We're going to expose some of the myths about manifestation. It's such a dirty 13-letter word. You know, it's like everybody treats it like it's, I don't know, a drug or something, you know?
Right.
And what I've realized over the past few years of really practicing practical manifestation is just a tool. Like we said in that first episode, it's like a knife. You know, I can use a knife to prepare a good meal for somebody, or I can use a knife to hurt myself or to hurt others. That's what manifestation is. It's a tool. Money is a tool. You can use it for good. You can use it for evil. And now, I've said this many times. I'm a Christian, and this podcast is not inherently a Christian podcast. But everything I do in my life is influenced through my Christian beliefs and through my studying the Bible. It's like if someone goes to Harvard and everything they talk about and teach is referenced based on their education at Harvard because it's prestigious and they learned a lot, they would mention that. They would reference that. So for me, my spiritual Harvard is the Bible, is my Christian faith.
And a lot of the comments were in relation to some people were enlightened by some of your thought-provoking talking points. I mean, they were, relating to the three heavens and relating to the spirituality of what you were discussing through manifesting.
And that's why I encourage people, if they haven't gone back and watched or listened to that episode, it's important that they start there. There's a lot of foundational elements to everything we're going to talk about now and in the future for years to come. That's like the foundation of my message and what we're going to uncover here today and in the future. And there's an interesting comment in one of the YouTube videos of the podcast, and it was someone kind of expressing gratitude or encouragement about me bridging the gap between Christianity, the Bible, and manifestation. I want to be cautious here because I'm not strictly trying to bridge the gap. I'm trying to create a bridge, which is different, right? I'm not trying to say that manifestation and these new age things are exactly proportionate to the truths and the power of the Bible and Christianity and faith and Jesus and whatnot. I'm trying to bring people from their new age mentality to a more spiritual, faith-based Christian perspective. Now, people are going to be like, well, you're trying to convert me to Christianity. I'm not saying that. But to me, it's like if you've ever watched a really good movie or a show and you tell your friend, you're like, dude, you got to watch this show. Right? You know that feeling when you just saw, right? Or you send a TikTok video.
We talk about movies all the time.
Yeah. It's just, you want other people to experience that. For me, that's Jesus, It's like, I want that for other people because I've experienced it. So take that feeling of you sharing a TV show or a movie and multiply it by 1 million. That's how I feel about it. That's why I'm so confident and I share my faith. But like I said, it's not about this being a Christian podcast. It's about exposing the literal, physical, spiritual, and neurological truths that we all are subjected to. And the reason why people relate to this, even if they're not Christian, even if you haven't studied the Bible, even if you're an atheist, God forbid, is because these are all truths. And so they're all relatable. And when you really dive into it, you see that what we're talking about does stem from ancient philosophy and wisdom. And the Bible was the origin story. And so everything else after the Bible was repackaged. So...
Interesting. So, I mean, why you're talking a little bit about evangelism, right? I mean, why not, put the teachings here? Like, why not instill faith in your viewership?
Yeah. I think because I I think God has placed me in a position where I get to be in a community that's not traditionally exposed to Christianity, to Jesus, so that I can help not bridge the gap, but be a bridge to get people from where they are to a more foundational aspect to all of this. Meaning, like I just said a moment ago, it's all repackaged philosophy and truth from the Bible. And when you realize that, you have to start being more intentional with what you attribute it to. And so for me, this is all an attribution game, meaning manifestation is not evil. I don't care what anybody says. I would go to toe-to-toe on this with any pastor, any priest, any person who runs a ministry, whatever it may be, because it's how you attribute the process and who you attribute the process to. Meaning, when I'm manifesting something, it's not because of my own selfish pride. It's because I genuinely believe, and I've prayed on it, that I'm in the will of God and I am trying to manifest in alignment with what he wants for my life. And I give all glory and honor to him, worship and praise, right? Where most people who manifest is like, oh, it's all me. I'm going to grow this business to $1 billion. I'm going to work hard so I can get the nice car. And that is true. It can work, but this is where we find most people succeed in a material perspective, but fall short at a spiritual perspective. And so here they are, 80, 81, 85 years old on their deathbed. They achieved all the material success, but they have nothing to show for it spiritually. And now they're calling out to God. Now they're reaching for something more.
Are you saying that I can do the personal work on my soul, my body, my spirit, and not attribute it to God?
Mm-hmm.
And am I still practicing Christianity if I'm doing the same work and practicing the same teachings but not attributing it to God?
I would go so far as to say many New Agers and people in the occult look more like Christians than actual Christians do, because they're practicing a form of faith. You know, they have that belief. But the problem lies in, once again, the attribution. And now we have to be careful, because it's like, oh, I could go, unalive somebody and say, oh, it's because God told me so. Like many serial killers have done that. So it's not just the attribution. It's also in alignment with scripture, in alignment with morality. And that's, this is probably a good point for me to bring up, is like, I'm not an authority on all things spiritual. I'm not an authority on all things neurological. Have I practiced a lot of these things and have implemented them and have achieved success in these areas? Sure. But anybody listening to this, first of all, some people are going to have massive revelation from listening to these episodes. And some people aren't. Some people it's going to go right over their head, and that's okay. The people that need to hear it will hear it. But also at all points, people listening or watching should be testing what I'm saying. They should be researching and fact checking me, both from a empirical perspective, meaning, do what I do. I go to scholar.google.com and I literally binge read white papers and studies on all of this stuff. And then I also read the Bible, and so you should be testing me against empirical evidence and scripture, especially for Christians. Don't take what I say as fact until you have proven it to be so. And so I want people to be curious, because curiosity is going to lead to a better understanding and ultimately knowledge, right? Knowledge is the application of information. So you can consume this and just get the information, but if you don't apply it, you'll never experience the knowledge and wisdom of actually applying the information. So all that to say, I encourage people who are not Christians, of any faith, whatever it may be, to listen to this with an open mind and an open heart. And I heard or saw a funny video, not a funny video, it was actually pretty touching. It was this guy, he's like, try it. Try Jesus. He's like, you tried drugs, you tried women, you've tried the money, you've tried pornography, why not try Jesus? Just try it, And so I feel the same way. It's like, just try it. I'm not trying to tell you, hey, you got to go, do all this. Just try it.
We got the same algorithm, me and you. I'm seeing all the same videos you're seeing. I'm seeing them before you send them to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, it shows up in people's lives in different ways. So, if they're here, that's the first step.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the people who are most successful are the curious people. And so whether or not you agree with everything I say, the fact that you're listening to this or watching this and you're curious, means that you have the capacity to change, to improve, to learn, to process. And that's a superpower that we all have. And not everybody exercises that. And I want people to understand that success is different for everybody. Everybody's brand of success looks differently. For some people, it's the material thing. Like we just talked about, that might not lead to spiritual success. For me, what I care about is spiritual success first. And I've seen that all things happen first in the spiritual side, because we are 100% spiritual and 100% physical at the same time. This is where it gets a little convoluted or a little confusing, because I'm trying to articulate something that's spiritual that doesn't have logical words to actually describe it. It's something that you have to experience physically. It's something that's caught, not taught, if you will.
Well, the listeners and viewers might say, of course you can say that when you're sitting in this gorgeous production studio that you pulled up to in your Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon with multiple investments and entrepreneurial pursuits, and you've already achieved that level of financial success. So of course you can say that your first bout is with spirituality, right?
Yeah, we often see this with people who have become successful. They say, oh, it's not about the money.
Right.
It's easy for them to say. Yeah. It is. You kind of have to get to that point. You got to drive the G-Wagon or buy the G-Wagon and realize it drives you to the same problems to realize that it's not about the car. The house still makes you feel lonely. It's these things that we hear from all these gurus who have already achieved it, But once again, some things are caught, not taught. Some people need to, crash and burn to realize that there's a better way. And it's a spiritual process, not a material or physical process. I just created my very own Hypnosis app where you can literally have me in your back pocket to help you lose weight faster, make more money, and make your success inevitable. I've combined ancient wisdom and modern day neuroscience to create this app where you can literally reprogram your own subconscious mind for success. To get started today, click the link below and grab your free 7-day trial. I'll see you on the inside.
So you talk a lot about the spiritual side of manifesting. There's our physical world. There's the traditional affirmations, breathing techniques, different things that are going to help me manifest the success, the body, the mind, the person that I want. What is going to have to take place on the spiritual side for me in order to get what I sought out for? Okay, we're going to, you wanted us to go into this, right?
I want to go deep. I want to double click. So for those listening, Bryce you're telling me that we got to rock people's world with the content, right?
Yeah.
All right. This is going to be something that some people are going to be mind blown about, and some people it's going to go right over their head.
Okay.
The spiritual currency is trust. Okay. Material currency is what? Money, right? That's our currency that we operate in. But spiritual currency is trust, meaning what do you need from someone to buy your services or to give you their money?
Trust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
trust that we're on the same creative plane. Trust that we're going to hold up each of our ends of the bargain. Trust that I can bring you around my expensive equipment, my family, my team. Trust.
Yep. So trust is the currency that is the spiritual currency that has to be stored up before the material currency. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the question becomes, well, how do I store up spiritual trust? Now you can do this from the viewpoint of storing up trust with God in the way that you're obedient to his word and how he wants you to live your life. Or you can even look at it as trust with self. Are you being intentional with your money? Are you being self-integral? Are you showing up for people the way you tell them you're going to show up for them? Are you providing the service that you are describing to them? So this integrity is really important. And I know it sounds simple on the surface, but when you really tap into this trust piece and leveraging that as a spiritual currency, that's when you start making more money. That's when you start experiencing more financial success and scaling your impact. And so it's easy to kind of say, hey, just be more self-integral, but it's deeper than that. There's a literal invisible currency of trust. And this is where I said some people are going to this is going to click with a lot of people, and some people it's going to go right over their head. That when you store that up, you are storing up wealth and abundance spiritually before you actually experience it physically.
Yeah, and I think the viewers are probably self-aware enough, as I am sitting here across from you, to have visualized some person or thing that is maybe a problem of trust, maybe that they see as, am I transacting trust in the right way? So whatever that person, I just want to urge people, whatever they thought of is the place where they need to put the focus, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Because people are hearing you preach right now, and they're understanding through their subconscious mind is telling them where their work needs to be done. Is that correct?
Yeah. And also this gets into the conversation of resonating with people. You always hear that, oh, that resonated with me so much. I want that for the people that are listening, but I also don't want that all the time. Because if I'm resonating with you all the time, that means I'm resonating with all of your current belief systems, which are probably not optimized, because you're probably not where you want to be if you're listening to this sort of podcast. You're trying to learn more and apply more so that you can achieve some sort of goal, next level success. And so if I'm constantly resonating with you, that means I'm not doing my job challenging your current belief systems so that we can get a change in those belief systems to ultimately produce a different outcome.
Got it. So the purpose of this is to potentially conflict with the status quo, people running on autopilot, although the majority who may or may not be running on autopilot are the people who are going to seek out videos like this when they're ready to make a change.
Yeah. And I want to get people flustered sometimes. I want people mad. I want people fighting in the comments and challenging me, because that pain will lead to growth faster than anything else. This is why you go to the gym and you break down your muscle. You know, I love my analogies. It's through that pain and discomfort and the breaking down of those muscle fibers that you get bigger and faster and stronger. So same thing spiritually, same thing mentally, same thing emotionally. You have to go through the pain to ultimately level up.
So if I'm placing value on the spiritual currency, which is trust, does that mean that I'm supposed to completely neglect the material and physical currency of money? Is money actually evil to my process of manifesting what I'm destined for?
So just like manifestation isn't evil, like I said, neither is money. First of all, if you look at it strictly from a biblical point of view, it says the love of money is the root of all evil. And I'm not sure if we talked about it in the first episode, but let's unpack this from a biblical perspective, because I know we have a lot of people listening that, you know, they're Christian or maybe just like interested in what this biblical truth is all about. The reason the Bible says that money is the root of all evil is because it will ultimately separate us from God if we let it. Think about it right now in 2025. What rules this world? Money. And so if you can conquer this world from a financial perspective, chances are that might separate you from God at some point, right? You have the yachts, you have the cars, you can get the girls, you have everything you want this on from this material perspective. So why do you need a God? You know, so that's the danger in it. We see even in Jesus's time, one of his disciples, Judas, he's the one that ultimately betrayed God, or betrayed Jesus rather, and basically handed him over to the people that ended up crucifying him. For what? For money. He was paid 30 pieces of silver to hand over Jesus, who he had already been walking hand in hand with, seeing these miracles. And so this is kind of reminding me that I think I did talk about this, but like, who are we to think that we can handle money or that success?
Well, inherently, Jesus trusted Judas, correct me if I'm wrong, enough to make him the treasurer of the disciples when he had a tax collector that was converted to one of the disciples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was actually known for stealing from the money that the disciples were already using. So he had already had a problem with money and greed. And obviously Jesus knew all of this.
But Jesus trusted him, right? So is that violation of trust like foundational to this principle that we're discussing right now?
I mean, look at the betrayal that Judas, that betrayal was evidence of that breakdown in the currency of trust.
So you could see the potential dangers in belief of the spiritual currency.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, the thing is, Judas was not storing up the spiritual currency.
But Jesus was.
Well, Jesus trusted him insofar as like he let it happen. I don't think Jesus necessarily trusted him because Jesus already knew it was going to happen. He knew he was going to be betrayed. Jesus is God in human form. Also, he's the Son of God. I don't want to get too involved in the Trinity type stuff just yet. Maybe that'd be for another episode. But Jesus already knew that Judas was going to betray him. he actually told the disciples that one of you is going to betray me. And Judas knew it was going to be him because he was the guy who was about greed and, and then Judas was so distraught after doing this, has so much pain and regret. And so just to answer the question is like, did Jesus trust? Probably. I don't think it was a trust. I think he just knew what was going to happen. And so he let it play out because it was part of the plan. Where Judas went wrong was his greed, his financial, lust, if you will, that ultimately led to his separation from God. And this is where the rubber meets the road. The only unforgivable sin is blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, like rejecting God altogether, rejecting Jesus. And so what led to Judas rejecting Jesus? Money. Hence, money is the root of all evil, or the love of money is the root of all evil, rather.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, I get it. So you have to understand the power of it to protect yourself from it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, which would you say of the two currencies is going to help me manifest my success faster? Because to someone who's just discovering the show or just discovering their faith, I'm going to think that immediately my instant gratification of my definition of success is financial compensation and a material currency of money.
Mm-hmm.
So how can I get right spiritually how can I get right spiritually in order to manifest what I want?
I think that's the core message of this whole thing. And what I really want to get across to people is like, sure, would I love for you to come to Jesus and like have a spiritual awakening and have your spiritual riches stored up and you get into heaven? Obviously, like as a Christian, I would love to save souls. But you can also take all this information we're talking about and apply it from a materialistic, physical, financial perspective, and you will gain in that capacity. And so therein lies the problem, though. This life is finite. My promise that I believe in is that my life is not finite because I am going to live eternally, with God because of my belief in Jesus. So the reason why I'm able to detach from like material things, and sure, I've achieved this success, so it's easy for me to say, it's because like, to me, this is just a blip in the radar. It's like, you ever have a bad dream and you wake up and you're like, oh, that was just a dream.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's what I think when we go into heaven, it's going to be like, that 80 years, that was nothing. You know what I mean? Like all this bad, like it's going to be so beyond our wildest imagination in a good way that it's not even going to matter.
Wow. Okay. So educate me. So what does our soul go to heaven? Is it the actual physical incarnation of you? Mm-hmm. If I see you there, is it going to be you or is it going to be just an energy?
So the Bible tells us we're going to have new bodies. And these are areas where I'm not as well versed in. And as I'm reading the Bible again, cover to cover, I'm doing more of a active study approach where I'm learning these things. What's interesting is I've always been able to articulate more of the spiritual mystery side of things than like the actual tangible evidence from like a historical context. Okay. Like, I'm able to explain between the lines rather than actually remember and recall. And I'm trying to do both now.
Okay. So, but wouldn't you say that heaven, the promise of heaven is the standard it's like the foundational belief that's going to allow you to, practice the spiritual life? Like, did I like
the goal is heaven? The
goal is heaven, right? And that is the reason why I would act moral and trust and store my faith in God, right?
That's two parts. It's not why you act good, because the Bible says there's nothing we can do to secure our salvation to get into heaven. That's the whole promise of Jesus, and I talked about this last time. The reason why I want to obey God is why someone might want to obey their father, who they really look up to and love and respect. I know that God has my back. I know what he said about me in his word. I know what he's spoken over my life. And I know that his ways are not my ways. And I love him and respect him and just have faith that he knows what's better for me than I do. And so it's the same way that you might trust in someone that you look up to on this side of heaven, someone like a real human. And so the reason I try, and once again, we all fall short. I mess up. I'm definitely, I got to be careful with this because God has put me in a season of bringing this sort of information to a lot of people with my platform. But he also tells us it's better for you to like be thrown into the ocean with a stone around your neck than to lead someone astray. And so if I'm preaching these things about Christianity and Jesus and faith, and I do it in a way that ends up leading somebody away, or I act behind closed doors around other people who know me more personally, and like, oh, this dude says he's a Christian, but he's talking like this or thinking this or whatever. Well, that's what I'm scared most about, is like leading people in the wrong direction. So that's why I say test me, check it, do your own research. But yeah.
Okay. Understood.
I feel like we need a practical palate cleanser.
Yeah.
So I have an idea that I just thought about that my followers have loved, and the OGs will remember this, are my manifestation quick tips.
This is my favorite. Okay.
Remember those? Okay.
Yeah,
I have your manifestation quick tip for today. It's to wrap your manifestation in dopamine. So what does that mean? Dopamine is the momentum chemical. We tend to think of it as the reward chemical, but it leads us to the reward. So they did a study with rats where they took out the dopamine mechanisms in their brain that release dopamine, and they put food in front of them. And the rats, no matter how hungry they were, no matter how long it had been since they last eaten, no matter if they were dying, they would not go eat the food because they had no dopamine to motivate them to get them there. If they put the food in the rat's mouth, they would eat it. But if it was outside of them, they had no mobilization. They had no neurochemical response that would actually activate them to take action to go get that food. And so how do we apply this to manifesting? We have to make our goal so enticing, so exciting. This is where we step into the feeling. This is where we see it and we visualize it, make it so real and tasty that we get a dopamine release in pursuit of that manifestation. So when you want to manifest something faster, get excited about it by stepping into it as though it's already happened. This is where we get into mental rehearsal. And what this will do is it'll create a neurochemical response where you get this release of dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, all of these good positive chemicals that are actually going to mobilize you unconsciously, automatically towards that goal.
I mean, it's happened for me and worked for me.
This is, if like on my tombstone when I die, this is going to be written there. It's going to say, you don't get what you want, you get what you focus on. And it's not just what you focus on consciously, it's the thoughts and the stories that you focus on unconsciously that are running in the background. That's why we talk about subconscious reprogramming. What does that really mean? We are reprogramming that automatic operating system that everybody has running at a neurological brain-based level. And so you can hack this system by consciously creating a state of focused effort or focused thought or focused intention, but that's very difficult. This is why resolutions always fall off. This is why people don't stick to their goals, because they're trying to affect change and achieve a goal consciously when they really should be updating the unconscious operating system first.
Okay, so unpack it for me, double click into this a little bit. What would be the difference between me practicing manifestation and then practicing manifestation wrapped in dopamine? What would be the distinct difference between the two?
So practicing manifestation is like without leveraging the neurochemical responses that are all accessible to us, especially, unless you have some severe neurological disorder. And ADHD, by the way, I'm not a doctor. So many people say, hey, I have ADHD. I can't focus. Probably a conversation for another time. But even if you have ADHD, I was diagnosed with ADHD, severe ADHD. In fact, I had a therapist tell me it was one of the most severe cases of ADHD they had ever experienced from a symptomatic perspective. And so here I am manifesting, using hypnosis, leveraging these tools to focus and to get what I want. So that being said, if you're going to manifest, you may as well do it by leveraging to the best of your ability the practical neurological processes that are already occurring inside of you, like this dopamine release, like leveraging acetylcholine, which is a focus chemical. And so really, if you're doing manifestation in general the right way, you're automatically doing this whether you want to label it or not. So most people who are doing manifestation are not thinking about wrapping their manifestation in dopamine, but they're doing it unintentionally because they are stepping into their outcome. Most people who do manifest are visualizing, and that will ultimately get a release of these neurochemicals. And so the more you do it, the more you focus on your goals, the more you focus on your manifestation, the more you visualize it, the more you live in it in your own mind first, the more likely you are to actually manifest that outcome.
Understood. So living in it, fantasizing over it,
Yep.
is going to automatically make me feel it, which is going to automatically make me feel good, which is coming from dopamine, right? So what would it look like if I was to manifest with that? Like give me some other manifestation practices that aren't necessarily related to stepping into my outcome.
Well, we see like most of it is future based, because if you think about other manifestation methods like affirmations,
Okay.
you're affirming something about yourself that should be congruent with your outcome, right? So if you think that you want to make more money and that represents value to you from a material perspective, you kind of either consciously or unconsciously understand that, well, I need to have that internal value. I need to have self-worth because my external bank account will always be congruent with my internal bank account. And so you tell yourself affirmations or things like, I completely love and accept myself. I am worthy of success. So you're technically affirming something that's congruent with your manifestation as though it's already a reality. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm articulating.
Of course.
Well.
Yeah, no, I understand.
So pretty much every manifestation process is doing some form of this. I'm putting a practical neurological framework around it so that you can do it more intentionally, because there's certain pieces that if you focus on leveraging these responses from a neurochemical perspective, you're going to succeed faster.
Understood. So can you just reveal to me maybe one of your top things that you manifested in your life? And then the actual, how you actually, like what you did to manifest it.
Yeah. I'll rattle off the things that I tend to rattle off because they're the biggest outcomes in my life. I almost 100 pounds of weight loss, manifested my G-Wagon, 1 million followers on social media. I'm a completely different person from a fear and anxiety perspective. I have virtually no fear and anxiety left in me, to the point that, I used to have health anxiety and go to the doctor all the time, where I'd have to be dying to go to the doctor now. And so those are the main things. I would say that the process is always the same. The process is first the most cliche thing, and this is a reason why everybody preaches it, is because it works, is clarity and vision. If you don't know what you want, you're already behind. Most people know what they want, so they got that checked off. But that's not enough. That's not clarity, right? You need to know what you want, who you need to become to have it, what you need to believe, what you need to stop believing, what fears you need to let go of. You need to know where those beliefs came from so you can ultimately reprogram them, which is step 2. Because once you have clarity, you know what you want, you know who you have to become, you know what your subconscious operating system needs to look like in order to align with your manifestation. Well, now you actually have to do the subconscious alignment and reprogramming by getting rid of those subconscious programs, by getting rid of the self-doubt, the fear, the low self-worth, so that now once your operating system is aligned with your manifestation and who you need to become to manifest it, well, now you just start taking the action that's congruent with that type of person. This is why this podcast is called The Identity Factor.
Yes. Now, have I avoided certain talking points that you want to get to? Tell me, where are we going?
Oh man, we did a little palate cleanser with the practical stuff. I always lean back towards the spiritual, and I told my private community the other day, I was like, I'm going to stop apologizing or giving these disclaimers for my faith. And, if you don't like listening to this because I talk about Christian beliefs and Jesus and the Bible, well, it's probably not for you anyways. I encourage you, even if you're a little triggered, like I said, stick around. Maybe you'll learn something or be able to read between the lines or have some revelation regardless of your current belief systems. Let's talk about why I get a lot of crap for this transition back into manifestation as a Christian. I actually had some pretty well-known Christian influencers write me off. I had one dude text me. He saw me post a manifestation video again after not posting for a long time. He's like, "Hey bro, that's a wrap on our friendship." I'm like, what? Because you don't understand where I'm coming from? I get it to some extent because...
well, then explain how you get it, because I don't.
Because like I said, manifestation is a dirty 13-letter word. it's taboo. People attribute it to the occult and to spiritual things like communicating with spirits and whatnot.
But is it? I must be a complete stranger to the space, because nothing you've ever said out loud to me, here, not here, privately, publicly, nothing has ever seemed un-Christian.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is like when I break it down for people, this is where like people have this aha moment every time I say this, is like, you are already a manifesting machine. You've been manifesting your whole life. Everything you have right now, you manifested it. And so if that's true, manifestation is not evil. It just is. It's a fact. It's a truth. It's a spiritual, physiological, quantum, whatever you want to call it. It's a truth. It's a fact of reality that we're all manifesting all the time. So why not take control over that process? And obviously people are like, well, it's not that you're in control. It's God's in control. Of course, God's in control. He is sovereign over all of this, but he also has given us power and authority over this life, over the spiritual world, over the physical world. He says this in Genesis. He gives us dominion, and he wants us to subdue the earth. He wants us to replenish it, right? So that tells me that I have authority and power over the physical world and over the spiritual world. So with that comes my authority over my finances. It comes my authority over my relationships, my authority over my success, my authority over my body. And I think there's too many timid Christians nowadays who are not walking in their authority and power. I was at the gym the other day, and one of the pastors from my church that I go to was at the gym. And I want to reach out to him after I tell this story. I'm not going to name who he is, but he comes up to me and he says hi. And I said, hey, what's up, man? When's the next time you're preaching? And he goes, oh, I'm preaching this Wednesday. I said, oh, awesome. I love when you're up there. You always crush it. He's like, oh, by the grace of God, only by the grace of God, pray for me. And he's just very like timid. And I'm like, dude, God has put you in a place of authority. He's put you on the front lines. Do you think he wants you getting up on stage at church with this timid, no, speak your authority, step into your power. And sure, does it all come from God? Yes, but he's given you the power. We are stewards of the resources. And when you end up being afraid of it and timid with it, that's actually a sin. People let's talk about money again for a second. People always say money's evil, but God doesn't want you to focus on the money. He doesn't want you to worship the money. And what you focus on in fear, you are worshiping. So who do you think focuses more on money and thinks more about money? The person who's always living paycheck to paycheck and struggles to pay their bills? Or the guy who's just abundant, has $1 million in the bank, has his house paid off? Who do you think really worships money more? The person that's probably stressing about it and in fear constantly.
Right.
So I would go so far as to say you're actually sinning by staying broke and staying poor, by fearing it. Now, don't get me wrong. So I think some people are not meant to steward finances. This gets back into subduing and having dominion and having authority. Not everybody has authority over every area spiritually or physically. Just like some people own different plots of land, some people own more. Same thing from a spiritual side. Some of us are called to be stewards in certain areas and have dominion over certain territories. For example, I think God has granted me authority and territory in this whole manifestation space from a spiritual perspective, because he knows there's a spiritual warfare going on here. And he knows that a lot of people in the manifestation community are doing evil things and interacting with demonic spirits, either knowingly or unknowingly. They're doing occult practices. So he's given me authority to be like, you know what, dude, go in there, right? Kick the door down. Because think about it. If I had gone into the manifestation community or tried to get in just preaching Jesus from the start, be like, oh, I'm a Christian and that's evil and you can't be doing that. Do you think anybody's going to listen to me? No. So it's funny because what he tells us, what Jesus says to his disciples is I'm going to make you fisher of men, right? To save souls and bring people to me and have faith in me for their salvation. Well, how do you fish when you fish? What do you do when you fish? If you were to go fishing right now, what would you do?
Get your gear.
But what's your gear? Well, how do you catch a fish?
A fishing pole.
Okay, what else?
Bait.
Okay. And so what determines the bait?
The type of fish.
Yeah. And so depending on who you're fishing for, the soul that you're helping save, your bait, your lure is going to look different. Maybe my lure is a G-Wagon and talking about manifestation, right? And so that gets a fish that I wouldn't normally be able to catch. I don't know. That feels congruent with me. My spiritual discernment is telling me that this God has put me here for a reason. That's not for everybody though. And here's where we get into a little bit of gray area, I think, and this is where people need to test me on, is sin. Not all sin is black and white, meaning Jesus has explicit commands for us, like the 10 Commandments. There are things that are objectively morally wrong that we shouldn't do. But then there's almost this conviction-based sin. And the Bible talks about this in the form of food, where some people were convicted not to eat a certain food, and so they wouldn't eat it, and they thought it was a sin to eat it. When the Apostle Paul was like, no, it's your conviction that makes it a sin. So if you believe you shouldn't eat it, then you shouldn't eat it because it's a sin for you because of your spiritual discernment. But for me, I don't see anything wrong with it. So what that means is that there's a gray area where it's a sin to go against your convictions, but the actual action isn't always a sin. And this is one of those like spiritual mysteries that I'm still trying to unpack.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a lot, I know.
No, I mean, I just, it's been making me think and wonder whether or not historical occurrences were manifested. It makes me think of like Julius Caesar in a time before Christianity, right, when Judaism was the primary religion of the region, or whatever practice. What religion were the ancient Greeks and Romans practicing?
Well, a lot of them were like mystics, and obviously the Greeks believed in all their Greek gods, and then you had Judaism, right? Technically, Jesus was a Jew.
So was the Roman Empire practicing Judaism?
Well, no, there were also a lot of like Judaism, but like they generally had a belief in God, right? Christianity was more like, okay, you have God and now you have the Messiah, Jesus.
Got it. So a lot of these like, empirical dynasties of our historical backlog, ancient history, these dynasties, must have been manifested in some way, whether or not it was positive or negative to the overall, outcome of the world, right?
Yeah. When you think, let's break down manifestation even more simply. It's cause and effect, right? Something is causing an outcome. It's input and outputs. Those inputs are our thoughts. Those inputs are our beliefs. Those inputs are our fears. That's the ones and zeros that are operating this physical body and ultimately manifesting our physical experience. And so God hit the cosmic start button on all of this. And the issue with it all is that he gave us free will. It's a blessing and a curse. He gave us free will because that's love. You have to choose love, right? He wanted us to honor him and love him, and he made us in his image. If he had made us robots without free will, is there any weight in that love if he just programmed that into us in that way, where it's just like automatic? No. And so because of free will, because of sin, evil has manifested. If you go back to like Nazi Germany, World War II, those people would have been convinced that it was the end of the world. And if Jesus is not coming back, there must not be a God. It's unfortunate that all of these evil things continue to happen, but it's a manifestation, one, of original sin. This takes us back to like Adam and Eve, but also the continuous sin that we live in. And this is why you often see in the Old Testament, you see God's wrath. You see what people will say is a very different God between the Old Testament and the New Testament. But we also can't comprehend how God was working the events in the Old Testament to get us to where we are today. Meaning, God knew that all of these stories in the Bible were going to be in the Bible and influence centuries and centuries of mankind. And so who am I to say that, him exposing his wrath on people and killing nations wasn't part of some grander scheme to save billions of people's souls? So I digress a little bit here. I don't know if that makes sense though.
No, of course it does. Yeah. You're saying that cause and effect.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Why don't you give a little bit of a synopsis on what the Bible is for people who are just discovering this through you? Because I think we have to do some kind of service to people who are just basically believing in you here, and they're going to do their own research homework, but, what is the Bible composed of and why?
So this is going to sound a little corny, but the Bible is like a love story between God and us. It's like he loved us so much that one, he made us in his image, and the way he set up all these parameters for us to our soul to be reunited with him in heaven, he had to sacrifice his own son, Jesus. But it's an instruction manual. I love the quote, Bible stands for basic instructions before leaving earth, And what always convinced me about the Bible, this is why I encourage people to like really sit down and study it, is because if you actually apply what the Bible teaches you, it's like, oh, duh, this makes sense. Duh, like treat others how I want to be treated. Golden rule, don't kill, don't steal, And now there's obviously some other nuances to it. There's even a stricter level of obedience that you actually want to step into when you believe in God. But what the issue is, the Bible is not to necessarily control you, it's to expose you. And so it's to expose where you're falling short, to expose where you're saying, it's a mirror. And so the goal is not to live obediently and to like be a good person so you can get into heaven. It's to be a good person, one, because you respect and love God, and he's kind of giving you this instruction manual, so why not listen to his wisdom? But it's also, we find in the Bible, this is why and I'm going to answer your question, this is why I encourage people, is because when you read the Bible, it's not a prosperity gospel. It's not about like the Joel Osteen philosophy of like, believe and you will receive this money and private jets. But the Bible time and time again shows that God blesses those who are closest to him. Like not just with spiritual peace, but also with gold and silver and land and resources. So to me, it's like, why not play the game the way God wants me to play it? It's not about just having money, but it's like God doesn't want us to like struggle all the time. There's a time and place to struggle and to learn through that. But my point, okay, to answer your question, reading the Bible is important. I think
what I was really looking for was like the technical, like collection, like what the Bible actually is, like a collection. I want you to tell like the viewer how it's a collection of like testimony and story from the four apostles and how that makes up. Yeah. Right?
So you obviously have the Gospels most people know about.
But it's not obvious. That's what you're missing. That's the one part that you're missing in all this, is that it's not obvious. None of it is obvious. Yeah. And to understand that this comes from real historical events is a way in for practical minded people who haven't explored faith yet. Yeah. So I think that's important because it helped me. Yeah. It doesn't matter what I am. It matters that it's a good way in to understand that it's a good way in to understand that Jesus Christ was a real human on earth. Yeah. And historical events took place. Mm-hmm. And the Bible is a result of, so just tell us a little bit.
So the Bible is made up of mostly letters from specifically Paul. He has written a lot of the Bible. But why you should read the Bible is because as you read it, you realize they are literal letters. They are not stories that somebody made up. Like it's like no one would write in that way. And actually, if you look at how history was recorded, there's a specific way in ancient times that you had to write pieces as a historical document so that you maintain the integrity historically. So you would say things about the geography and the rulers of the time and the politicians because it gave context to when and why you were writing from a historical standpoint. And so you see this throughout the Bible. That gives you some context clues. There's also some like really nuanced aspects that point to the fact that it has to be something that literally happened. And if people want to dive more into this, I suggest listening to Wesley Huff. He was just on Joe Rogan podcast talking about the history of the Bible and ancient wisdom and stuff like that.
Yeah, he's a genius.
One of the things I heard him talk about was, I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but he was talking about when Jesus arrived in some town with his disciples. And now Matthew was the tax collector. He was the money guy. Jesus needed something from a financial standpoint. They needed to figure out where to stay or something like that. And so he would always ask Matthew because he's the guy that handled that. He was the coordinator of the finances and like where to stay. But in this particular scene, he asked, I believe it was Peter. And on the surface, you're like, okay, no big deal. He just asked Peter to help him find where to stay or where to buy food or something. I think it was where to buy food. But if you look at it, you have to ask, why didn't he ask Matthew, who was the guy that originally would handle that stuff? Well, we asked Peter because they were in the town where Peter's brother lived. So who was more likely to know where to get resources? Peter. Who writing a story, like from a fictional standpoint, would ever like be that nuanced with that? You know, it's like, so there's all these subtle cues in there that convince you that this is one real. But that's not enough, because people, even atheist scholars, agree that Jesus was a person.
Right.
The point of conflict comes down to the resurrection. So the question is not, is Jesus a real person, but did he die? And then did he actually come back to life 3 days later? So one of the greatest pieces of evidence that I love is the Shroud of Turin. And this is something that people should Google, and maybe we can pull up a graphic of this as I'm talking here. But it's it's the burial cloth of Jesus that has an X-rayed image of him from 2,000 years ago that no one has been able to replicate since. We're at peak technological ability in 2025 so far, and they cannot replicate this.
What do you mean an X-rayed image?
So the burial cloth of Jesus, as the Bible refers, was wrapped around him as he was laid in the tomb.
Okay.
The claim is, if you look at these pictures, that we have that burial cloth. And you know when you see an X-ray, is because the body was exposed to radiation that then left an X-ray image on it.
Right.
This shroud has an X-ray image of Jesus on it. And it shows where his crown of thorns was, shows where he was pierced in his side, it shows where he was hung with his nails, to like the exact degree of which the Bible described all these things. So what this means is that something supernatural must have happened when he was resurrected, where he emitted this is my theory, and I've done some research on it, that he emitted so much radiation, so much power, supernatural power, that he left a freaking...
And light, right?
Light, like literally and think about all the metaphor to light and God being light and Jesus, right? And he left this X-ray image on a cloth, physical cloth.
And that still exists to this day?
Still exists to this. I don't know where it is off the top of my head.
Wow. Okay. Well, man, there's a lot to uncover here. I think this is a good picture being painted for what the future might look like for this podcast. I think it has a lot to do with our identity. I think it has a lot to do with our group identity. It has a lot to do with your personal identity. And I think people are going to continue to find a lot of value.
Yeah. I just want to leave people too, if they're curious about this whole Bible thing, many people are going to be, I was always caught up with like, well, how do you read the Bible? You know, do you read it like a book? Do you play Bible roulette and just put your finger in there and find a verse? You know, I personally think now, having done this, done the devotionals, done the Bible roulette, I've never had so much understanding spiritually than when I've started reading it cover to cover, but not cover to cover, like from Old Testament to New Testament. What I would suggest people do first is I would go to first Genesis, because that tells us like the creation story. So read like the first part of Genesis, which is like chapters 1 through 11. That'll kind of give you a good overview of the story of creation. Then you would go to the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John gives you really good insight and an overview of Jesus's life and why we, believe in him and what his story was and what his message was. Then I would go to Romans, which is really an explanation of some of the more complex mysteries of the Bible, spiritual understanding. And then finally, what I would do is I would start at the beginning of the New Testament, read that all the way through like a book, and then I would go back to the Old Testament and read that all the way through like a book. And then ultimately what that would get you to is now you've read the whole thing and now you go back and actively study it. Can you actively study it along the way and take notes? Sure. But I think consuming it like an algorithm that you are downloading, basically just taking in the words, that's enough to start with, and then actively read it. And the reason why I say to start with the New Testament is because when you read the story of Jesus and you read what he did and how amazing he was and what implications it had for our existence and our souls today, and then you read the Old Testament, the context is mind-blowing because you realized everything that happened in the Old Testament was all leading up to this Messiah coming, this resurrection and this salvation. So that's how I would read the Bible if I were starting from scratch.
Okay. We'll take your word for it. That's not what I meant.
Yeah, no, I know.
Okay, good.
Make sure you let us know if this is useful, if you like where this is going. If you have, I think questions would be good to drop them in the comments, send me an email, and we'll do our best. Maybe we'll start doing like a question and answer section on this.
Yeah, and maybe if there's enough people engaging and interacting with these posts and podcasts on YouTube, maybe we'll even go live on YouTube and field questions while we're in it. So that'd be a great opportunity for us too.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Cool. This is fun. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you trusting me with your time. And if you love this content, you want to check out more of it, then you're going to want to watch one of these other videos above. We got a bunch of great content and videos on hypnosis, subconscious reprogramming, and general mindset philosophies, techniques, and methods. So check those out. And also, if you haven't done so already, make sure you grab my brand new hypnosis app. It's called MindMod. Has audios for everything from success to weight loss to even quitting smoking. It's all on there. So when you click the link in the description below, you get a free 7-day trial when you download today.